Welcome to The Self You Seek with Dr. Brendan. This podcast might just change your life. I'm Dr. Brendan Doherty, a medical doctor, psychiatrist, business owner, inner guidance coach, and fitness fanatic. On this show, I explore topics and engage with individuals to help you unlock your full potential. My mission is to support your journey towards self-actualization, complete well-being, and a life aligned with your authentic needs. There will be actionable insights, inspiring stories, and I will lean into my curiosity to get the story behind the person, understanding the deep truths and expertise of our guests. Get ready to feel empowered, and, if you desire, some information that might just change your life. And a quick reminder, this podcast is not a substitute for medical or mental health advice and should not be treated as such. The content here is for informational purposes only. Always consult with qualified medical and therapeutic professionals before making decisions related to your health and mental well-being. And now for the show. Welcome, Rachel Zitin, to this next episode of the Self You Seek podcast. It's very exciting to have you here. And if you can see this recording, Rachel is tuning in from the Tuscan countryside, and that's close to where she lives, which is in Italy, in Rome. And met Rachel at a yoga training a couple years ago and kept in contact. And I wanted to have her on today because she does a few things that I'm not really I haven't had a whole lot of experience with it. I want to understand those. So Rachel is a somatic therapist and an embodiment coach, as well as doing other amazing things like yoga. And she does a lot of retreats. She's a retreat facilitator in amazing places like where she is now in Tuscany. And more recently calls herself a pleasure enthusiast, which I think everyone should call themselves. But I think that's a nice way to introduce you. So Rachel, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. It is an honor.
Yeah, well, I think we've been meaning to connect for a while, so it's nice to finally do that. And yeah, let's just get straight into it. I want to know, tell me about somatic therapy and embodiment, wherever that takes you, whatever feels right.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think the base, beginning place, all started in childhood. We start with, I did my first yoga teacher training in 2018. So just 6.5 years ago. And when I did that, my initial idea of wanting to study yoga deeper was that I wanted to deepen my own practice. I didn't have much intention of moving forward with being a yoga teacher. And I come from what I like to sort of affectionately and unaffectionately call a very heady background. So a lot of headiness, a lot of neck up sort of existence, a lot of neck up thinking, a lot of neck up interacting with other people in the world around me. And doing my yoga teacher training was almost this way of I'd been doing yoga for years before I did my teacher training. And I am not exaggerating when I say, when a teacher said something like, locate your sit bones, it was like my brain knew what that meant, but I literally didn't feel it in my body, literally did not have that sensation, which now that I do seems almost hard. It's hard to explain the reverse, but it's something that I think a lot of people feel, which is, I'm going to label it right now, disembodiment, just being disconnected from what's going on below your neck. So as I sort of started to fumble my way through those first years of yoga teaching, and I've worked in tourism in Italy for a really long time. And what I started to notice was, as I started to, and it's not like it actually happened incrementally, but I like to sort of think of it's I slowly dropped my awareness all the way to my feet. I started to understand my whole body. And as I was teaching yoga, I started to realize, and again, this is part of that heady background thing. It's I want to be able to interact with people around this. I want to be able to talk about this experience of, now can you find your sit bones? Now do you understand? I remember when I did my teacher training, the word proprioception, which is just the idea of where your body is in space and time. I'd never heard that word. I didn't understand it. I certainly didn't know how to teach or explain it. And as I kept teaching yoga, it sort of started with, I'm going to misquote this. I want to say it's Thich Nhat Hanh, who talks about like imagining your hands with your eyes closed and you still know that you have hands, even though you can't physically see them. And slowly this idea of proprioception and being more and more in our bodies, I want to say it just made me realize I wanted to be able to interact with people. So a few years ago, I did a somatic coaching course after scouring the internet. It's a London-based school. They're called the Somatic School. I'm obsessed with them. And the man who founded it comes from a psychotherapy background, which really appealed to my headiness. My like, okay, I want to make sure that this is something that's not just, I wanted it to have science backing, basically. I wanted it to have some sort of roots in traditional practices. And he calls the coaching that I do body oriented. So it draws from all of these different modules, not modules, what I'm looking for, fields, schools of thought, basically, and pulls from everything from Hakomi to IFS, internal family systems. And then eventually I sort of started calling it just a embodiment, because for me, embodiment is this idea of no matter where I am, and thus with my clients and with my friends and with anyone who will listen to me as I talk about it, it gets quicker each time I do it. And I think as I work with people, it gets quicker for them too, which is just the idea of being able to drop back into my body. Like, can I find discomfort? Can I feel something? And then that sort of turns into this sort of like interoception exploration, which is interoception being what you're feeling inside. So I have butterflies in my stomach. My palms got sweaty. I'm having these like literally physical reactions. We all know these words and my mind feels fuzzy. Like all these things really related to nervous system response. And then being able to go, what does that mean? Not that everything has to have a meaning, but starting to be able to connect these like, oh, when I do this, I feel this in my body, as opposed to constantly having this like neck up dialogue. And then as I've like incorporated that into yoga, so when I coach someone, I'm not just sitting right in front of them like this. I'm having them move their body. I'm having them, we did this before, we were having some technical difficulties, like shaking out your body and just realizing like that's, I think when you first, and actually I'm going to be really forthright here, when I first saw people in communities of where embodiment's more prevalent, doing things like shaking, sometimes for me it felt a little put on. Like, that's not really what you want to be doing right now, is it? And now it's like, oh yeah, like a 5-year-old, like that's exactly what I need to do. Like, I just need to shake. And so, yeah, that's sort of evolved into, and I guess this is the next part. So I'll wrap up that by saying that's for me what embodiment coaching is: identifying, being able to, and then exteroception, which is our senses. So being able to take in the world, being able to be present in our bodies, and being able to notice what's going on inside us. I want to say like as an extension of nature, like we are all interconnected. And so being able to just like really focus on yourself from the neck down. And then that combined with, I've lived in Rome, I'm American, but I've lived in Rome for 15 years. And the Italians as a general whole, while not necessarily as advanced in sort of like mental health, and yet mental health is still, I don't want to say a dirty word, but therapy is not nearly as common here as it is in the Anglo-Saxon world. And yet the Italians are really present in their bodies. And I think I noticed that as I moved forward with embodiment coaching, and as I sort of started to like weave these parts of my existence, career, purpose, passion, mission together, I also realized, wow, the Italians are really like hyper aware of their bodies. In Italy, even something as basic as there's a gazillion rules for how you can and can't eat food, like you can't swim 2 hours after you've eaten. You can't have a cappuccino after midday. There's all these things that at first feel really persnickety. And then you realize, oh, these are just like body awareness things. No one wants a glass of hot milk after a meal. That's gross. No one, like if I said that to you baseline, you're like, ugh. But then a cappuccino sounds good and it's tasty. And sort of the Italians are really in tune with not overriding the things. that we Italians also, as a general rule, don't get very intoxicated, even when they're out in a social situation. It's like they tend to stay pretty embodied. And so that's all woven together to make one big sort of exploration of the human existence.
That's amazing. And just picking up on that last point, but the Italians are obviously using their body when they're communicating, right? More than anyone.
When I speak Italian, literally, it's really funny because when I speak Italian around non-Italian speaking friends, they're like, Rachel, the second you start speaking Italian, it's like your whole body language change. Like I used my hands more, and it's not like I'm not putting on a show. I'm not a cartoon. I like literally they use their whole bodies. Everything's communicated. There's a hand gesture for most of the emotions that you could feel, which is incredible for people who, again, aren't super advanced in mental health. But yeah, there's an embodiment inherent in, and I think it's probably true of a lot of Mediterranean and even possibly like close to the equator cultures, which is a whole other thing that I'm fascinated by, is just the different morals and ethics that cultures have and how they kind of change as you're in hot places and cooler places and so on. But the Italians are very in their bodies.
Mm. When you're speaking Italian, does your body feel different than when you're speaking English? Just on that point.
Totally. 100%. In fact, and I didn't used to notice it because I've been speaking Italian longer than I've been in my body, which is a wild and true thing to say. But yeah, I feel different when I speak Italian, not like a completely different person, but it's something that I've worked with on a sort of emotional processy level for a while, which is, yes, I feel there's things in Italian that I feel like I can express better in Italian than in English, and vice versa, of course. My whole me feels like she is communicated. I mean, it's probably 80-20 English to Italian, but there's definitely a part of me in Italian that's separate and different than me in English, for sure. Yeah.
And involves movement, obviously. Yeah.
So much.
Yeah, it's fascinating. That's a great story. And it's lovely to hear about, your own personal experience. And I think, the majority of the therapy world or coaching world have gotten into something because of an experience in their life. I don't know whether you're willing to share this or not, but maybe drawing on, experience that you've had working with people or even on your own experience, what kind of an upbringing do you think leads to a disembodiment before we get to the embodiment? Like, where does that come from? Yeah.
That's such a good question. I would say like a Western upbringing, like living in the Western world, right? Like, which is to say, honestly, my parents they're very alternative actually, which is interesting. And a lot of my clients also have very sort of alternative minded parents. Like I was eating carob when I was a child. I was, going to homeopathy and acupuncture, all these things from a really young age. But I think my parents and a lot of people in the Western world and the Western education system even really focuses on neck up learning. And I think the Italians do too. And yet there's more focus on play. There's more focus on work-life balance. There's more time spent just in your body. And I think one of the things I notice a lot, and I've seen this in clients, is even clients who are what I would define as quite embodied, which is to say, for me, disembodiment also meant I didn't feel comfortable dancing. I didn't feel like I had any rhythm. It was almost like I was in this like sort of machine that I was aware of, but I wasn't fully in. And I find even people who come from really physical backgrounds, so like athletes who are really in their bodies, but athletes often override body sensation to push further. So, anyone from a runner to a ballerina are going to be kind of ignoring the cues in order to achieve, which honestly, that's such a beautiful question. Because I think in general, almost every upbringing leads to disembodiment in one way or another. We are so often told like even something, it's a little thing, but it's big. Finish your plate of food before you leave the table is kind of a way to tell your kids, don't listen to what your belly, like, I'm not teaching you to listen to your belly. I'm teaching you to follow these rules, which baseline is a nice thing. Like, I've served you this food, now eat it, but also leads to disembodiment because I'm full. I don't want any more. And you're telling me I have to keep eating. And I don't necessarily even know what the sensation of being full is when I'm 5, 6, 7. So I think a lot of disembodiment, like everything, starts in those crucial before 7 years. Even something, a parent telling you not to cry.
Yeah, exactly. That's what comes to mind too. Or a parent insisting that a child hug someone just for the sake of it, even though the child's body might be saying, don't do that, then the kid is sort of made to do that. So then they start to ignore their own, it's a thought and a feeling, but it comes from a feeling, doesn't it? Which comes in the body.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. It's all like, that's such a beautiful way to put it, because the thought is the feeling. It's an intuition. It's a awareness of, and of course there's things like, I always say it, the whole baseline is we're all animals, right? And animals are fully in their bodies all the time, pretty much. Like, that's what animals do. And we, yes, living in society, like, if I have to pee right now, I'm not just going to pee sitting here. Like, I have been raised the right way. So even if my body's telling me I have to pee, I have been told that I can hold my pee, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't have to pee. But, like that idea of,
and we're happy that these values are instilled in you.
Exactly. We're really glad I'm not just sitting here in public. Exactly. But then the hug is the perfect example where the kid says, no, I don't want to. And it's not a thought, it's a feeling. And I think that in modern, like, culture's a pendulum in a lot of ways, right? So in some senses, there is a part of me that's like, listen, you can teach your kid to accept and not, like, I think that's a great, giving your kid the authority and the autonomy to understand, like, when they want touch from someone is so important. And like, you're at the nursing home and you're visiting grandma and you're like, can you just like give grandma a little kiss on the cheek? Might actually be a socially acceptable thing to be like, I understand maybe you don't, this is what we do, but then also listen to yourself. And that, I think, is honestly, to like skip way ahead, what embodiment is: understanding a lot of how you fit into society. And there's different situations in this world where you get to be more and less connected, and where you agree that we all exist together. So again, I'm not going to pee right here. I don't think we're going to let that metaphor go and not talk about it the rest of the time. Autonomy, authority over yourself and your feelings.
Yeah, at least not ignoring them, but even if you do override them, that at least you understand that they're there. I really, initially when you said a Western upbringing, I was struggling. But then when you think about the types of practices or therapies that involve understanding the body, such as yoga, meditation, mindfulness, qigong, these kind of things, they are all body focused. You're very right. And I'm struggling to think of Western types of practices. I mean, I guess there is different sports, of course, it's all about the body, but it's not really about understanding the body so much. And usually, like, if the Olympics are on right now, we're kind of, a lot of those are sort of, as you said, overriding. I personally do yoga and I do CrossFit. Those are kind of the things, and I play a bit of paddle at the moment, but they're polar opposites. So with CrossFit, in general, the generalization, you're trying to push yourself really hard, like lift more, run further, jump higher, whatever it is, or jump more. And yoga, when done, it's usually you're encouraged to sense in your body what's going on. And CrossFit is, of course, a Western practice. But I also went through this period of like trying to be a bit more embodied in CrossFit and like almost feel the pain and enjoy the pain and really, but clue into my body at the same time. That was kind of a good thing and kind of a bad thing, because then I understand why people need to dissociate, because when you dissociate, sometimes you just go into a different level and you can just push on and you're thinking of something else. But even in something like CrossFit, I do think that embodiment is useful, because then you understand your body more, you understand your limits, and you probably get injured less. But anyway, I just thought I'd chuck that in there.
I love that because no, that like, yes. And I think that's the whole thing is even, and that's kind of what I was saying about society before too, which is embodiment for me means being aware of your body. And then also what you were just saying with the Eastern versus Western practices, I think one of the big things the Eastern ones all have in common is mind-body connection. And something like CrossFit doesn't necessarily baseline have that in mind at all. But I also think that push, again, like, or ballet is another great example of just like your feet are ripped to shreds, everything's falling apart, but you look amazed. Like, I love watching ballet. I think it's one of the most beautiful things ever. And I'm aware of the sacrifices that the dancers are making for my entertainment, basically, right? Like, not, God, I'm going to really quickly just throw in a tiny little ancient Rome reference, which is gladiators, right? Or anything, or the Olympics too, like you said. And I think with what you said about CrossFit, I think this is also, it's almost like that's the third level of embodiment. And I always say, I think with a lot of spiritual practices, when you first get them, you sometimes, I'm going to speak for myself, become a little annoying. Like, okay, now we're embodied. So we have to always, like what you said, like, I'm going to feel the pain. And then you're like, eventually you start to think in your head and you're like, God, dissociation actually feels pretty good here. But wait, right? Like, this is nice. I'd rather dissociate while I'm lifting the weight that's heavier than I've ever lifted. But if we look at that as the awareness that you are dissociating means you still have a mind-body connection, right? Which is to say, there's people, and I think it also, I mean, we can broaden this into such a bigger thing, which is people who've survived like complex PTSD, like, sexual trauma and war and those like big things, big T trauma, like dissociating in the moment when that was happening, that's your body protecting itself. Like animals do that too. Dissociation actually is very healthy.
Yeah.
Dissociating forever is very unhealthy. So it's like and I always say, like, there's no way I've reached my hashtag embodiment goals. It's a process. But when I talk to clients, I describe my moment, my first moment I ever like got it. And I was in my kitchen and I was cooking. And I'd been really focusing on like being present in my body when I did stuff. And I floated the heck away. It's like 1 second I'm cooking and the next second I'm planning 7 years from now, looking at the past, shamed, all these different things start coming in, which is what happens when we stop being present. And then I realized I was doing it. And it was like this simple phrase, which is, oh, you just keep coming back. Like I can just bring my awareness into my belly right now, right? Like, and I'm back. Like 1 second I'm here and I'm there. And I do this all the time. I'm very bouncy. And then it's like, I can tell the shift in my body. And I know people I'm around can too. And I work in a lot of public, like retreat leading, and I worked in tourism for a long time, working in public facing jobs where I'm doing most of the speaking and most of it's like just being like, come back. So your CrossFit example, which is so good, is like, cool, I'm going to feel the pain. And in the same session where you're exploring that mind-body connection, you're a fully embodied human, I'm going to say, knowing you. And being a fully embodied human, you get to also go, all right, now's the time to dissociate. This, sucks, but also I'm going to feel so much better on the other side of this. That playing and awareness and like kind of rubbing against the edges of everything, like testing the rules, testing what feels right, testing, oh, wow, this time, like I overate, but God, I'm going to be in Naples eating pizza how many times in my life? That was worth it. Versus I'm overeating every single night and I'm not paying attention at all. I'm just shoveling to try to feed myself.
Yeah.
They're really different.
Very different, very different. Once you're aware, then you're conscious of what's going on. So you're trying, by the sounds of it, you're just trying to get people to have some sort of awareness of whatever bodily thing is going on and to pay attention to it. And then from there, they can make the decision what they do with that, as opposed to just, well, I was going to say mindlessly, but almost bodilessly going on and doing whatever it is they're going to do without paying attention to neck down. Yeah. It also it reminds me, I was listening to some podcasts actually by a coach, and I should know this, but the amount of neuronal connections to our body and the amount of information that's being fed up into our brain by far outweighs the number of thoughts that we're able to have. So actually the information that we're getting from our body is much more and much richer than it is in the level of thoughts. And thought has really only come into play in recent, history in terms of, humans as a species. And obviously it's very useful for us. But as you said, in Western societies, which, thought has given us lots of wonderful things, of course, but we've kind of, in my opinion, over prioritized that. And now we just, it's almost like now you're saying it's like a cultural dissociation from trust in our bodies, and almost like words like intuition or how do I feel, or is like they've been kind of in sometimes dirty words in like particularly scientific communities. Now, I'm not saying, well, I think the best is when you're integrating both. That's, that's the most sort of useful state for a society, a human, or an education, whatever it is. But if we just do the thought, then we're neglecting a lot of information that we could be using.
100%. And baseline, could not agree more. You need both. Like, we can't just be, if we only listen to our bodies, I mean, there's a lot of different kind of joke scenarios, but like it could end up very sort of like Lord of the Flies-y, right? Very like primal and primitive. Yeah, and so it's like we are, again, these sort of whole integrated creatures, and we get to become more so. But I have two other things to say to that. So when I first started teaching yoga, the first people I taught were high schoolers. I taught at a high school in Rome, and I was super nervous. And I mean, I must have been 31, 32. And it was just so funny because there was something about it that was very like intimidating. So I go in, and in the first class that I'm teaching, I sit us all in a circle first. And I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, but I remember the feeling of being like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I sit down and I'm with all these kids and I say, we're talking about mindfulness basically and breathing and how that's the baseline of yoga. And it's like, really basic yoga class. They'd taken yoga before, but it was my first day on the job. And so what I said was the human, and I'm going to say 40 to 80,000 because I forget the exact number and I know it's in that range. But I said, you have 40 to 80,000 thoughts a day. And one of the kids looks me dead in the eyes and goes, how did you know? I was like, oh no, like, you're not, sir, like you're everyone. We all do. But it was like him, this 16-year-old kid, he thought I was, like, you have that many thoughts. And he's like, oh God, she knows. Oh God.
I'm an overthinker. They can tell I'm an overthinker.
She knows.
Yeah, nice.
I'm saying that.
Probably half the world feels like that. Yeah.
I say, and so that was my moment of going, oh, like, we don't know that. How funny. Like, I guess there was a time I didn't know that. And so this idea that if we all recognize, it's like when people have like bad thoughts and you're like, funny example, my mom has this thing, and it's actually got a name, where when she drives over a really big bridge, she has this urge to drive off of it. And the internet has made the world a thing, where I found a random Instagram reel about this the other day, and there's millions of people commenting on it because the internet, in a happy way, has connected us all. So actually, my mom is not alone in that. This is like a human thought pattern that she's never done it, thank goodness. She's a very happy, she's a psychotherapist, but for whatever reason, when she's on this big bridge, she has this little moment of like, what if I swerved off? I've never had that. That's a thought it's fine. Like, it's not, if you don't act on it, it's a thought. Thoughts aren't actions. She's never done it. And so getting people into this space of, like you were kind of saying before, like your thoughts are important, but they're not like we all have weird thoughts sometimes. That's what humans do. And so if we can recognize that and even maybe eventually declassify what makes weird and what doesn't, and realize that thoughts don't have to lead to actions, there's so much more fluidity in the human experience. And then the other thing I wanted to say real quick is one of my favorite things to say now, and I get a lot of pushback on this, but is our brain is the most important organ in our body, according to our brain decided that. So we can't live without a pumping heart, right? I can't live without a stomach. I mean, I could be a vegetable and live without a bladder or a liver, or I can't live without skin. Like skin's definitely a more important organ than brain in terms of just basic livability. And actually humans with, obviously living in a vegetable state doesn't sound fun, but it's this idea that our brains classified itself as our most important organ, but everything's important. So
it's an interesting, I really like that. It's the brain talking there, because there's a certain number of organs that you simply can't exist without, skin being one of them. I mean, brain is probably one of them. Like you can't really just exist without a brain because nothing works. And heart, of course, but they do have machines that can replace the heart for a short period of time. Without a digestive system, you can't survive. And we know how much. Yeah, interesting. I like that. But they're not well spoken, are they? The heart doesn't have the digestive system, unless it's gurgling, doesn't have a good speech. Yeah, interesting. I like that.
Thank you.
Now, I was going to ask, so someone comes into, well, maybe you can take us, I mean, you've given a really wonderful overview of what embodiment is. I'm curious if someone were to say, is considering to see an embodiment coach or a somatic therapist or something like that, what would the process be like? What would a session look like, or what would you do? And what kind of people, I mean, maybe you'll say everyone in the West, but what kind of people typically come to see a somatic therapist?
Yeah, I think it's so a typical session starts for me, like a new client begins with me just gauging where they are in their body. And I do think that because in my coaching course that I did, half of us were very heady oriented people and half of us were very body oriented people, which is to say we had psychologists and psychotherapists and psychiatrists and people who've worked in a very neck up approach who were interested in figuring out body down stuff. And then we had yoga teachers and professional dancers and movement experts who were really in this sort of bottom up approach. And so I think it's first of all finding where my client fits in that spectrum and being able to see things like, can you orient yourself to what's around you? Because some people have trouble even finding themselves in space and time. Again, can you feel your sit bones? What does it feel like to close your eyes and go inside your body? What does it feel like when you look yourself in the eyes in the mirror? So all of these are ways of sort of gauging what's your relationship to self. And then for me, the second and kind of the next important thing is can you trust me and leave preconceived notions of what feels silly? So again, shaking, and just kind of be in the process. And then generally speaking, in the beginning of any session, we'll go into the body to locate what's most alive for the client that day, which is to say, eyes down. And I come from a sort of I lead meditations, I teach yoga. So but it's not a meditation because you're not forgetting thoughts. You're actually bringing everything front of mind. So you're going, okay, maybe I come up to therapy and you can tell and I also will say, I find talk therapy extremely important. I don't think it's a one or the other. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I think that I'm an incredibly empathetic and compassionate person, but if a client comes to me and in coming to me realizes for the first time say that they're a victim of big T trauma, I'm going to say, this is not actually like, I can hold this as a human, but professionally speaking, I'd like you to work with a therapist or a psychiatrist or someone who can really, I'd like you to work with someone who has a little bit more training, because I'm trauma informed. I don't want to put that in air quotes. I am trauma informed, but I do not have the broad range of skills to necessarily work with that alone. So, point being, someone comes to me and it's like, what's real for you right now? And often, and I remember when I first started doing therapy, it was just like, oh my God, so fun. I'm talking. And it's like, for me, what my therapist would normally do was kind of like tab everything. Whereas what I'll do as a somatic therapist, which is to say, start to like parcel off and figure out how we're going to work with that. What I'll do is be like, okay, no, stop. Like, this is your thinking mind. Let's figure out a way to see if we can drop even just a little further into the body. Like, you need trust. So there's a developing of a trusting relationship there of like, if you close down your eyes and I ask you, can you locate your inner child? Can you find warmth in your body? Can you feel sensations? And then can we turn, it's like a DJ almost, or like you're dialing up and down and going, what can we work with that might be material that you aren't used to tapping into? And I think that material is everything that's going on in our bodies, whether it's, I'm talking about your relationship with your mother, and is your stomach getting tight? Is there, like, can we move through this slow instead of going through your thoughts? Can we get there incrementally? And in doing that, can you trust me that everything is safe? That everything that we're accessing is something that we together in this place that we've created can slowly start to move through. And even more importantly, and I think this is the thing with, I spent a lot of time when I first started coaching with my clients, and I think this is coming from a heady background, having a lot of incredibly gifted psychotherapists, psychiatrists, psychologists in my life, and feeling my own inadequacy. But I think it actually works and it benefits my clients now because I go really slow. So I'm not trying to solve all of, and I don't think therapists are either, but I think in therapy, sometimes because it's in talk therapy, the talk based ends up being a lot of back and forth. And so for me, it's like, if that, and I think therapists do this too, but for me, it's like, if we've located a feeling in your body that doesn't feel safe, your belly is suddenly going, ugh. Like, that's information, and I don't have to probe too deep. I don't have to go in there. I get to let you also kind of trusting. And I think this is the way I view coaching in general, is that coaching for me is trusting that whoever's sitting in front of me already has all the answers inside of them. Everything they need. I'm a conduit, not in a like sort of woo-woo esoteric way, but in a literal, like, I'm here with all of the knowledge I have about the science of how your body is working and the science of how your mind is working. And I'm here in all of it, ready to just like let you move through this process.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. You're very good at expanding. I appreciate that. And I'm just wondering, so the end point of this is that, kind of as we've discussed, people will then be aware of sensations in their body that they weren't before. And in the case of trauma, they will learn that those sensations are okay, or they're linked to it. Like they get to the point, like what would a successful outcome be when they finally...
Workable is the first word I thought of, is okay. And like, sometimes again, like, if you're a survivor, and I've had clients who were the thing I said before is real. I've had clients who were survivors of big T trauma who weren't working with a therapist, who I was able to go, you need to work with a therapist, but I'd love to keep working with you as well, because I want to expand on really reclaiming safety inside your body.
Sometimes it's helped people work with therapists because you kind of take care of the body and the sensations. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And for me, there's something around you locate, and it's recognizing that we're all perfect and we're all perfectly imperfect, right? So with a client, for me, a success story is I can tell when someone's in their body or in their mind, right? So with a client, it's like you're being sort of like the teacher's pet of a client and trying really hard to like prove to me that you're doing it. And it's like, no, like I'm not mean mommy here. Like it might be a really slow process. And you can tell in the way someone moves. You can tell in the way someone carries themselves. You can start to tell in the ways, and we lose it. That's part of the just keep coming back, which is to say I get overexcited and I'm like, ba-da-da-da-da, or I get nervous and I shut down, or I whatever. But it's being able to be like, I'm going to walk slowly and mindfully. I'm going to eat it's mindfulness. And then for me as a yoga teacher, so a lot of I do embodiment coaching as well on retreat. And so on a week-long retreat, it's having someone show up, and I do it through, I do somatic dance practices that are sort of inspired by 5 rhythms, like a lot of stuff around being in your body. And you can tell in someone's yoga practice how embodied they are. And again, what I will humbly and gratefully admit is that I'm not done. I never will be. Like there's pockets of my body that I'm aware I haven't explored. But if you tell me to find my sit bones, I immediately know where they are right now. So I think a success, like anything in coaching, and with coaching, I find it's like a pretty like magical, I hate the word alchemical, and yet I love the word alchemical, because that is what we're doing as humans, is we're turning things that have happened to us into gold, and recognizing that our inherent self is gold. Like we're all capable of change. We're all capable of locating and finding goodness. So I think with me, the way I work with clients is I require a minimum of 3 to 5 sessions, because I think one session can be a one-off, and it's nice to have a little package so that you have a little time to expand on little things. But I'm very much a believer of, again, which it's very aligned with what I do, like you have to be feeling like you're still getting benefit from this. So it's like, for me, a success is a client saying, wow, that was really great. I learned this. It's not like, all right, you've like, check, you're now ready to go to the next level. It's like, you keep unlocking stuff and you keep learning stuff.
A quick question. Can it be done online?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I prefer in person, not because, that's like a selfish personal preference. I just like humans and I like human interaction. And I think the way our nervous systems regulate together in the flesh is just a little deeper and a little more profound. I think there's a little more opportunity for exploration. And equally, I've had plenty of clients who I've only worked with online. And what's nice about online is that, generally speaking, when you're in an online coaching session, you're in a space that you're really comfortable in. You're not in my space, you're in your space. So when you're in your space, you're safer. And it's like, I can say, you're in your space and you imprint that memory. So like we're doing work where I'm guiding you through a body scan meditation, and I'm helping you go, whatever tension you're feeling, I want you to clock that so we can work with it later. And then 2 days later, you're in your same desk that you were talking to me in, and you've got that like physical recollection, that body memory. So I think, and you feel safer being goofy online.
Yeah.
So I do exercises with clients doing things like, can you, like very kind of gestalty, like make this glass your mother and have a conversation with her. And you might have an easier time doing that online where you're, this is silly, but here I am. I feel less judged. Yeah.
Yeah. As you know, I work a lot online too. And there's plenty of downsides, and it is, it's not quite the same as being in person. But one of the big upsides, I think, is exactly what you've said, which is people, if you're in a comfortable environment that's familiar to you, you can go deeper with some things. And I think some people actually are quite able to relax more. And also observing people in their environment and how they react to it is also a really cool thing as well, which I think would be quite useful in this kind of therapy as well. Do you ever put your hands on people? Is that part of the therapy as well?
Yeah. Absolutely. With consent and with talking and with, I definitely do. I will say thus far in my career, 85%, 90% of my clients are women, which makes it a slightly, I don't want to say easier. It's a
less complex,
maybe a safer space, less complex. Exactly. Less complex. I would ask before I do it. Absolutely. Especially in the context of, so I look at retreat leading as an extension of my somatic coaching. And in retreat leading, I'm a very physical person. I touch everyone all the time. So I ask, I figure it out. But I also think that in the context of a one-on-one coaching session, sometimes even something like a gentle hand on the arm can be a really beautiful way to bring someone deeper into their body. It's like, and also asking, like, which is a beautiful practice that I bring into coaching sometimes. Like, is there any touch that would feel like, would you like me to like hold your shoulder? Would you like me to like stroke your hair? Is there anything right now that can help integrate or embody? Can you embody that? Would you be able to embody this experience more? So I'm not just going to like come out and give you a massage, but I think touch is useful. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, just a simple example is when, like in a yoga class, or you're trying to really find yourself in a pose or something, like an instructor will just gently guide you. It doesn't even need to be a guidance, but sometimes putting a hand on your back or something, and it's just like your whole body relaxes, and then it happens sometimes. I don't know, it's a weird thing. But in our day and age, and of course, as a psychiatrist, I never touch a patient. It's completely off limits, but for good reason. But in your type of therapy, it should happen, I think, with consent in the right ways. Which brings me also to the point which you were talking about before, which was music to my ears, around safety and making sure that you've got the right person, the right match, and not going outside of limits. Every doctor, therapist, psychologist, coach needs to know the limits of their practice. It doesn't matter how skilled you are. No one knows everything. And it's really important, that we talk about that. And the great thing is that there's a world of people out there that do things that you're not doing and can help people in other ways. And often it's beautiful when we work, when someone gets different therapies from different people, and that can be really good. But it involves people, keeping their ego in check and not working beyond the limits of their practice. So that's great. And I was going to ask then, are there any, and this is the doctor and psychiatrist inside me, are there any risks to this therapy, and any kind of things where it's like, no, that person should not have that kind of therapy? And I just kind of, what comes to mind, I'm sure, is when I've seen physios sometimes in the past, they've sometimes said, not to me necessarily, but they brought up the point, some people just like try and feel their body too much. Like if they're always like clicking their knuckles, or they're moving their neck in a certain way like big tough guys do or whatever, and they're like, it doesn't really help your neck pain to always do that, or to like, it doesn't help your wrist to click it all the time or something like that. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, were there cases where you're like, you know what, you actually need more head, less body?
What's funny is, I think because water always finds its level, I have never had the experience of having someone who is too embodied come to me, which is to say, I think my approach and the way, again, like you have to find the right person for you. So someone who's like super hyper embodied probably is going to see me as, or like hyper sort of like, again, body, I attract more head people. Again, and it's such a broad definition, and it's something like that is made up in my Rachel brain. It's not something that's like officially there's head people and body people. It's just like that's how and I think a lot of people, it's a range. It's not black and white. But I've never had anyone come to me who's like, actually, that's not true. I've worked with people who are way embodied, and my approach to that, and I've never thought about this. So it's really cool that you just asked that question. I, not being a licensed therapist and not having all of the skills, but I just move it up towards the head a little bit. So it's like, as in, let's talk a little bit more than we explore the body. I have one single client that I can remember that happening with, but also just in conversation with super embodied people, I have never had a client where I thought they were too embodied is my first answer. And then my second is having a mom who's a psychotherapist. And actually, I know my mother, and I know she'd be really comfortable with me sharing this. My mother is a survivor of CPTSD, so complex PTSD. And she's a therapist. And when I first started teaching yoga, like within 2 years of it, probably. And when you learn to teach yoga, you learn a lot of stuff that at first, for me at least, felt sort of like esoteric and now feels very scientific. Things like we store a lot of trauma in our hips, which is something that I think more and more licensed psychologists, psychiatrists, more and more people are like, fascia is holding a lot of your emotions. There's a lot of things in the sort of body-oriented psychosomatic world that are more and more scientifically provable. But I was teaching my mother yoga, and just me and her, like, it's my mom at her house. And I get her into pigeon pose. And when she's in pigeon pose, and this is what you were saying before, that sometimes a strategic hand, just like the pop allows you to, I call it a pop. So it's like you have your shoulders up to your ears, and I don't have to come and like push them down. I just touch your shoulder, and your body and your brain go, oh yeah, right, duh. I can relax. And my mom's in pigeon pose, and I'm her daughter, and we have a very good relationship. So it's not like it's a mother-daughter relationship, but it's not like there's this huge storyline that's running right then. And I go up and I put my hand on her lower back while she's in pigeon, very lightly. And she freaks out, loses it, like yells at me. Her whole body tenses up. Everything changes. And this is before I'd done my coaching degree. But it was such a beautiful moment. And thank God it was her. And thank God it was me. And thank God that's when I had that happen. Because it was so surprising to me. Like I felt like, and it's a mom. So I felt like I was 5 again and I'd done something, it's like this very complex moment. But the actual thing is and she has processed that trauma in this really beautiful way, which is a whole other story for a whole other day, involving psychedelics and many other things that we can bring to another topic sometime, in the last 5 years. But that moment 5 years ago when she freaked out was a really good check for me. This is before I even did somatic coaching, of this is not okay. Like this like on my end, like what I did was too much. And I didn't realize it was too much. And if she had not, I apologized to her. I'm so grateful I didn't have to do that with a client. And I know now intuitively, and also from studying human behavior and also from reading a lot about how to be trauma informed, that I knew my mom's story then. But yeah, so the point being, I think that's sort of my answer to your question is I go really slow. And that was me thinking I was going slow, but it's like I have to go even slower.
And pigeon, so if someone
being
comes to me, like a very vulnerable position, because it's pretty intense on your hip and there's a lot of emotions there. And yeah, I guess it's part of your expertise now that you're able to read that even more, right?
Exactly. 100%. So that simple moment of going, my mom, a PTSD survivor, couldn't handle having gentle touch on her hip in that state of vulnerability, makes me realize my clients who don't have, A, don't have the same history, but B, might not have, like, my mom trusts me. It's not like she thought I was going to do something wrong, but her trauma overrode her ability to regulate. So yeah, I think for me, as a somatic coach, as someone who works with the body, going even slower than I want, like there's people, and I think this is there's a part of me that thinks it's necessary and there's a part of me that thinks it's not, which is there's provocative therapies and provocative coaching. And I think in general, if you're going to practice that type of coaching or therapy, you need to be so explicitly clear, especially in one-on-one work, that's what you're doing. I do also believe that in group work, sometimes trauma-informed becomes a parody of itself, which is to say in group work, unfortunately, every single one of us is working with different things. And so if we're doing group processing or group dancing or something like that, it can be a place of, wow, the individual has to take more personal responsibility. But in one-on-one work, the onus is all on me. And so I go slow.
Nice one. Well, yeah, as I said, it's music to my ears. And yeah, if you're working with people with trauma, it's a gently, informing of what's going to happen. Yeah, and all the steps that you've talked about. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I think that the listeners will find, I suspect there's a lot of people that listen that won't know a whole lot about this type of work either. And I think your explanations will be very useful. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And it comes across that you're passionate about it and you've got a great story to tell about that. Before we wrap up though, I want to just, this podcast called The Self You Seek, right? And it's good to hear a bit more about people's stories as well. And, how did someone, I feel like you're living like a pretty damn good life, right? We keep in contact. I follow your Instagram and I've heard you talk about it and you do lots of great things and it feels like you're in many ways in your element. I'm sure there's plenty of struggles as well, but how, for you, you've gone from the US to Rome and doing the things that you want to do. Is there any kind of, do you want to share any of that story or give advice to people that are thinking of making big changes like that, related or not related to what we've been talking about in this sort of final section?
Yeah, I'd be honored to. One of the questions I ask myself regularly is, how did this girl, me from North Carolina, very normal middle class background, end up living this life in Rome? And I think my baseline is that I kind of just kept saying yes. I said yes to things that were scary. I said yes to opportunities that seemed insane. And that was me in my 20s, was just saying yes. And it's not easy advice to give to someone in their 30s, because once we reach 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, those yeses become they have more story behind them. So I always say I'm also lucky that I kind of made a lot of really crazy big leaps, like before my prefrontal cortex was fully developed, which happens at like 25, 26. Yeah. But then the next later, really?
I reckon it never becomes developed, but anyway, yeah, later. I think early 30s.
I love that. Never. We're all just little kids. It's fine. It's perfect. Have fun.
Yeah. Even when it's shrinking, when you're like, 80 or 90 and it's still developing just in a different way, just getting rid of the stuff you really don't need.
We're always in process. That's the best part. We always get to change our minds. So yeah, I could tell. So I worked in tourism for over a decade and I still dabble in it sometimes, leading tours around Rome. And another thing, like my tours around Rome now, I love the history of Rome. I love history. I love humans. That's my baseline. I just love them so much. And I love showing humans, especially people from my culture and cultures that might be a little like Anglo-Saxon cultures, Italy, and sort of dancing that dance. But how I ended up here now is I kind of just decided, I just kept making decisions. And of course, like you said, I really appreciate you for acknowledging that too, because it's something I bring up to people a lot, which is my life, which is so charmed and so blessed and so full of goodness that sometimes I like pinch myself at how good things are. And that's also, it's nature and nurture. I was born with a very open, I trusted saying yes, and that's my nature, which is to say it's not something that everyone has. And so if you don't have that, I think that there's also a space of really refining and deciding what your desires in life are. And stepping back, one of the things I say to anyone who will listen all the time is there are no rules. It's all made up, everything, like everything from, and it's all made up in a way, like we were talking in the beginning of the podcast, it's all made up, and it's good that some of it's made up. It's good that we don't have people just like, using the toilet in public and punching people in the face when they feel like it, etc. But when you can kind of peel back all the layers of humans and realize that everything's made up, you realize that what you're feeling right here, right now, in the present moment is actually the most important thing, which isn't to say just go on your feelings, but is to say, I'm feeling really upset. And sometimes that upset or that fear will take days to work through, or even weeks, or for some people months, for some people years. We're always evolving and changing. But like, can I come back to, for me, this existence, which I'm living, which is so different from the existence that I thought I would live, that my friends and family from the States are living, that a lot of my friends here are living. It's like a lot of it has just been because I remind myself, like, what's important to me, and finding the dichotomies in that, and what is, which is to say, actually, I'm going to bring up a personal story between you and me, which is we met on a yoga teacher training. And the first night we hung out, we were like, should we go get steak? It was like, I was craving steak, you were craving steak. And as two people who, it's like, we're at a teacher training. A lot of yogis are vegans. This is so counterintuitive to, like, I'm aware of why putting red meat in my body during a yoga teacher training probably isn't the best for my prana and my whatever, but also just going, this is it. We have this moment. Like, I want to eat a steak. I'm going to eat a steak, and I'm not going to overthink it. There's also something to be said as a chronic overthinker, not overthinking it. So I say yes to things. And I find my headiness, even in the question that you just asked. Because all I want to say to the listeners and to people who are pursuing things and are wanting to change big things is like flexibility, pliability, a little bit of openness, a little bit of not needing things to have a certain outcome, a little bit of finding magic and testing things and going, ooh, this feels good or this doesn't. And there's something to be said about, like, it's like, I want to say, like, finding your inner truth, just finding that, like, North Star. And for me, one of my North Stars is pleasure and fun. And sometimes it feels so frivolous to say, I live my life pursuing pleasure and fun. But it's like, and in pursuing pleasure and fun, maybe one of my purposes here is to help other people pursue pleasure and fun, to find lightness in really heavy situations. And that kind of goes back to a lot of other things we've talked about in this conversation, which is it's really hard to find the lightness in PTSD. Please work with someone who will help you process that. And then also come to me, because I'm here to show you that really, no matter what, we deserve pleasure and we deserve fun and we deserve to do things that light us up, and we deserve to forget a little bit of the societal conditioning that we've been brought up with, knowing, and I think I'm extremely fortunate that I got to move into this culture that's so different from the culture I was raised in, and yet has a lot of similarities, which is Italians, as in I didn't move to Mars. There's still baselines, but being able to go, wow, the things that Italians value are different than the things that Americans value. And one isn't right or wrong. So telling any of the listeners, like, check your value system. There's a million value systems in the world, and there's no way, just like the brain can't say it's the most important organ, like, there's no way that your value system is the only important value system. There's too many other options for you to limit yourself to that. So pushing against the edges and recognizing that, we deserve pleasure. Again.
That's the moral of the story. I really like the idea of there being no rules, because, I mean, there are, of course, things that constrain us at times, but as much as you can differentiate those that really constrain us to ones that we just can get rid of, that were placed there from, a culture that we don't identify with, or, upbringing that, was good in some ways and not in others, and instilled values that might not necessarily suit us. It's really important to, tune into that and try and be as free as possible. So, Rachel, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Thanks so much for making the time out of your weekend in Tuscany. And I hope we can connect again. And if for people that want to connect with you, we'll put your Instagram in the show notes. But if you want to share that now or any other way to connect, please do.
Yeah, my website as well. So my Instagram and my website are both Rachel Zitin, Zitin, rachelzitin.com, at Rachel Zitin. And I lead retreats in Italy and beyond. Right now, it's mostly Italy and the United States that are focused on just sort of embodiment, pleasure, rest, enjoyment. I always say to anyone, and I have so much respect for deeper and more like profound retreats. I think I've been on them. I love them. I think it's beautiful. I think my retreats have an element of that. But for me, the combination of spending so long living in Italy and just seeing the beauty of what a vacation does. Like sometimes all we need is a vacation, right? We don't need to do more therapy. We need to like unplug from our lives and that's it. Just lay on a beach somewhere. And that's the kind of experience that I try to provide for the people who come on my retreats. I do a lot of women only stuff, but I also do stuff for women and men. So just, come find me in Italy. Find me on Instagram, find my website, write me a message, all the things, stay in touch.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, they sound pretty good to me. I know some people that have been on them and they've enjoyed them. So thanks again, Rachel.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Until next time.
Thank you for joining me, Dr. Brendan, on The Self You Seek. This podcast might just change your life. We hope you enjoyed the show as much as we enjoyed creating it. And if you found value in today's episode, please consider following and subscribing on our YouTube channel and your preferred podcast platform. Your support is invaluable to us. And please share this podcast with your nearest and dearest so they too can live their best, most actualized lives.